100 potential atomic bombs are back on the table. The Iranian problem that remains, and the stockpile of uranium that nobody knows where is located. The United States is concentrating 3 aircraft carriers in the Middle East, and this is CENTCOM's largest concentration of naval power in 2 decades, intended for deterrence and for control in the air and at sea. This is ahead of a possibility that the fighting could resume at any moment. And right now, it seems that even the Iranians do not know who is in power in their own country. So will the United States and Iran reach a breakthrough this week? I have to say, it doesn't look that way at all. But Trump says that they are available to speak with the Iranians at any time right now. Because at the very last second, the American president canceled the delegation that was supposed to leave for negotiations with Iran. And in Israel, we are preparing for the collapse of the talks. The American military is preparing for war. And in Iran, they insist that there are no negotiations with the United States and that they are ready for every treacherous scenario. So what's happening and what is expected next? We will bring you the full picture of the negotiations that could collapse at any moment. The Revolutionary Guards in Iran announced just now that they have prepared detention camps for enemy soldiers, and their forces are on full alert. So where will the wind in the Middle East blow this week? Let me know in the comments if anybody knows. I'm Yair Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani, and we are boots on the ground, bringing you the full truth about what's happening in Israel and also the full truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. And this is the opening of day 57 of the war, Roaring Lion, or by its American name, Epic Fury. Iran is not folding. Trump announced, I canceled the trip with Witkoff and Kushner. They will not fly 18 hours just to talk about nothing, according to Trump. While the United States continues to impose a naval blockade on Iran, 34 ships have been blocked on their way to Iranian ports or from them. In Tehran, they insist that the Americans are not really capable of enforcing it, and they report the passage of another oil tanker. But United States Central Command, CENTCOM, released footage this morning of the destroyer USS Rafael Peralta enforcing the blockade and taking control of a ship flying an Iranian flag. But apparently, the Iranians keep forgetting that 3 aircraft carriers are operating in the area at the same time: the Lincoln, the Ford, and the Bush. Together, on board, they carry more than 200 planes and helicopters and 15,000 air and naval crew members. At least 9 destroyers are operating alongside the aircraft carriers in their strike groups, which are prepared for the renewal of fighting if the talks collapse. So right now, it's not clear why and with what strength the Revolutionary Guards in Iran are flexing their muscles. But after Arakshi, the Iranian president, they also left Pakistan without meeting the American representatives. And Trump told a Fox News reporter that while Witkoff and Kushner were preparing for the flight, he told his people, "You are not flying. All the cards are in our hands." And according to him, the Iranians can call whenever they want. So, as we all understood, Trump decided to cancel the trip of his envoys to the talks in Islamabad. American Secretary of War Hegseth said that the era of hitchhikers is over. Europe needs Hormuz more than we do. Trump himself, in the last few hours, confirmed that he canceled the American delegation to Pakistan, saying that it is a waste of time and the Iranian leadership is divided and confused. And the President of the United States added on the subject, "We have all the cards. Iran has none. If they want to talk, all they need to do is call." According to Pakistani officials, Iran refused at this stage to meet with the American delegation that was expected to arrive tonight. In Tehran, they continue to insist on the full removal of the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz as a precondition for opening negotiations. And since the beginning of the direct fighting with Iran, people have repeatedly spoken about half a ton of uranium that is apparently buried in the compound that was bombed. But according to the information revealed recently, Iran has 11 tons of uranium at different enrichment levels. After purification, that's enough to build more atomic bombs than the nuclear arsenal that foreign reports claim that Israel has. And the location of this stockpile, which is guarded by the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, is unknown. We will bring you all the details soon about the plan to neutralize Iran's nuclear power. And the United States imposed new sanctions on Iran, which also include the central bank. The United States Treasury Department announced the imposition of Iran-related sanctions on 20 companies and 19 vessels, including oil and gas tankers. Why is the United States avoiding the elimination of Iran's swarms of boats? In the Strait of Hormuz, the question is being asked, why, despite America's ability to strike the fast vessels, is Washington, according to the assessments, avoiding a broad operation against these mosquito fleet? The reason may be concern over the erosion of resources, harm to the readiness of a regional campaign, and getting dragged into prolonged fighting against hundreds of small targets in the Persian Gulf. We will speak about this subject with our expert, Mati Shoshani, and we will also bring you the response after they fold in the face of Iran. Britain and Spain understand that may be coming, and what the planned American sanctions are. They're extremely severe, but in response, the Prime Minister of Spain chose to take a jab at the United States President Donald Trump ahead of the steps that he is expected to take. And maybe the war has closed the Gulf, but now it turns out that the United States is becoming the gas station of the entire world. United States energy exports are breaking records, with almost 12.9 million barrels per day of oil and petroleum products, while exports of liquefied natural gas are also soaring. Europe and Asia are searching for every available shipment. But behind this jump, there is also a much bigger question. Can the United States turn wartime demand into a permanent advantage, or is this a one-time window created by the chaos in Hormuz? And meanwhile, in Lebanon, we are in a situation between hope and collapse. These are decisive weeks for an arrangement between Israel and Lebanon. The coming weeks will be the ultimate test of Israeli deterrence and American diplomatic determination, a test that could lead to the elimination of Hezbollah and the rebuilding of Lebanon. But while the talks between Jerusalem and Beirut continue, the terrorist organization is trying to rebuild the slogan, Defender of Lebanon, and is forcing thousands of displaced Shiites to return to destroyed villages. And the result? Dozens of daily incitement and incidents with the IDF forces. The IDF announced that over the weekend, more than 15 Hezbollah terrorists were eliminated in southern Lebanon. According to the statement from the IDF spokesperson, forces from Division 36 eliminated 3 terrorists who were traveling in an armed pickup truck, as well as another terrorist who was riding a motorcycle south of the forward defensive line. There's a lot ahead of us, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and with me is Mati Shoshani, and we are boots on the ground, bringing you the full truth about what's happening in Israel. And this is day 57 of the war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And just before we begin, I want to call on you to continue spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Click on the subscribe button. And most importantly, do not forget to look for me, Yair Pinto, and for Mati Shoshani on our social media platforms so you can get the behind-the-scene look of what it's like to live in Israel during a war. So, our senior Middle East affairs correspondent, Mati Shoshani, are we already seeing the collapse of the negotiations with Iran, or is Donald Trump simply changing tactics and forcing Tehran to come to him on his terms?
No, I don't think there are negotiations right now, Yael. What we're seeing right now today is sort of the real expression, the physical expression of the fact that the Iranians and the Americans are talking in two completely unrelated lines of communication. The Iranians had people in Islamabad in Pakistan that were supposed to be there to negotiate. They came without really planning to give the United States anything they were actually asking for. And President Trump, I should say, very reasonably, just looked at the situation and said, why would we send a group of people there, waste several days of their time when there's nothing to talk about? He's said several times in the past that we don't have to have physical negotiations for the war to end one way or another. Again, I think a lot of people have created this, this paradigm where it can only end one of these ways. It has to be a very decisive victory in the military, sense of it. There needs to be a signing and a cutting of a ribbon and stuff like that. And I tell you that there's another very valid option. Like many conflicts in recent years, including the one going on in between the Ukraine and Russia right now, some conflicts just don't end; they just fizzle out. I mean, look at what's happening right now in the Middle East. Now we have a conflict with Hamas that ended with the victory of Israel, but Hamas still exists, and Israel is still maintaining the line in the Gaza Strip. Same goes with Hezbollah. Same goes with the Iranians. Trump, and this is a very practical sentence, he could just get up and leave and say, "We won the end. Strait of Hormuz is someone else's problem," and move on to do something else. And I know this sounds like a bizarre way to look at this, but if people expect there to be this, grand ceremony where the United States and the Iranians agree on everything, that's not happening. That's not coming down anyone's pipeline anytime soon. The same applies to the military option. That doesn't end the war. So just to summarize this thought, here's what we know. The only way to resolve these issues is diplomatically. There is no other option. There is no way to do this by, bombing your way into an agreement or into a peace agreement or a ceasefire that lasts and actually does these kind of things. The only way to do it is with an agreement. And what's happening right now is that the United States and the Iranians, their interests don't require having a more substantial ceasefire. Why? Because the Iranians, well, they're comfortable with what they have. They were hoping to survive. They, for the most part, survived. Now they're looking at this and they're saying, maybe we can get a little more out of this. Maybe this whole conversation that we've been having through Twitter, and other outlets with President Trump about, excuse me, there's some mosquitoes that are trying to get in my mouth. This whole conversation that we've been having with President Trump over Twitter, over, maybe we'll be collecting money from other ships. We like that idea. Maybe we should further explore this idea. And from the Trump perspective, he doesn't gain anything from going back to bombing the Iranians. Having some kind of big ceremony with, with the ceasefire, in which there's not a full opening of the Strait of Hormuz, doesn't further his cause anyway. So here we are. The Iranians have a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. The Americans have a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians aren't launching ballistic missiles. They don't have a nuclear plan. We've destroyed all their factories that manufacture ballistic missiles. Israel isn't at war right now. And that's where we are. And I have good and bad news for us, Yael. We're probably going to be here the same way in a week. And it's possible that also in 2 weeks and also in 3 weeks. And at one point or another, the U.S. will just say, this is where we are. There might be a small ceremony, and the ships will go back home, and things will sort of go back to usual. And then, sadly, and this is what a lot of Israeli analysts are saying, in 3 years and 5 years, we'll have another skirmish with the Iranians because they're still going to be there. This isn't ideal. This isn't optimal, but there is no real negotiation right now. And anyone that's trying to paint this picture of, oh, look, we're just, in the nuance of the things. What nuance, Yael? We're not agreeing on any of the big items. They're saying they want nuclear. The U.S. says you're not going to have nuclear. They want to have ballistic missiles. The U.S. is saying no ballistic missiles. They want to fund proxies. We're not okay with that. We'll continue fighting until they don't have proxies. They want to use their shadow fleet, to circumvent these sanctions that were imposed on them by the United States and other countries. The U.S. says, don't. We have a blockade on your country. Where do you meet in the middle with all those things, Yael? I don't see that happening.
Yeah, it's very hard. I agree with you completely. It's very hard. But let's talk about what we do know. Okay, so we do know that the United States has more and more troops in the Strait of Hormuz. Like 3 aircraft carriers or 2.5. So one is a bit further away, and dozens of destroyers, helicopters, airplanes, 15,000 troops that are part of these huge machines that you can see on the screen next to us. It's like it's a massive military power. Like what Tomer told me just before the show, that it's like the biggest concentration of U.S. troops in one area for many, many years now. So is this really just for show to gain a better position in the negotiations when they happen? Or is the U.S. is really going to use all this force?
I think that's really it's something here that's nuanced and needs to be understood. The army is not there for show. It is the biggest buildup, I believe, of weapons, not necessarily manpower, since the invasion of Iraq, like the proper invasion under then, Bush. So there's a very substantial buildup of soldiers. From what I've heard, we're talking more than 15,000 ground troops in the area, 3 carrier groups, a huge amount of air force, and all the intelligence and all the bases in the region that are all building up towards this, this cause. This isn't for show. The U.S. is fighting a war. It has a blockade on Iran. That's not going anywhere. That's not changing anytime soon. That is a reality. But does that bring us to an agreement, or does it change what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz? And we've talked about this a lot in recent days. We're fighting an asymmetrical war. In this war, there is no doubt and no question that even with a single carrier group, the U.S. would overwhelmingly be more powerful than the Iranians. There's no debate over this. No one in Iran is saying our army is stronger than your army. That's not even a question. That is obvious. It's been obvious since the opening moments of this war. That's not the problem here. The problem here is with all that military might and the fact that the U.S. is hunting the Iranian speedboats and hunting and following the ballistic launchers, and has satellite surveillance on every possible location of nuclear materials, and the list goes on and on. All it takes to disrupt trade in the Strait of Hormuz for days is one little rubber boat with a bunch of IRGC terrorists on it, who say to the boat over a loudspeaker or on the radio, we are the forces of Iran, turn around or be blown out of the water. That's enough. And this is why this is a very asymmetrical war. It's not about who is stronger. The U.S. is stronger. Israel is stronger. It's not about who can cause more financial damage. We know the answer to that too. The United States and Israel cause substantially more financial damage. This last part here is a PR element, and it's a question of how the U.S. and how the Iranians are going to shape this conversation, and importantly, how the ships that want to get through the Strait of Hormuz, how they look at the situation from their risk analysis. That's the question here. It's not whether or not the U.S. controls the area. It controls the area. It's whether or not it's completely safe for those ships. And that is not just a military question here. That's here. That's a question in the head of, do you feel safe? Mm-hmm. Are you going to take the risk? And I want to tell you one more thing that's sort of important to understand about the Strait of Hormuz. The way the media is portraying this, let's call it the mainstream media is portraying this, is that the Strait of Hormuz is closed, right? Like that's the image that we're given. The Iranians aren't allowed to get ships out, and no one else is allowed to move through the Strait of Hormuz. That's not actually fully true. That's a reality here. There are ships. There
are ships that are moving in and out.
Exactly.
We every other day we hear of an Iranian ship that's moving out, or a different ship that moved out maybe closer to the Strait of Oman, like further away from Iran, and made it through. So, but it's a drizzle compared to the amount that was before this war started.
Exactly, and what it leads you to believe is, one, there are other ways to tackle this. I don't want to go into the details because several of the companies who've been moving ships don't want to publicly talk about how they're moving those ships. But let's say that there are ways to get around this if you're willing to take certain risks or not to talk about it publicly. And even the Iranians have allegedly been able to move some ships. I mean, yesterday, Friday, I saw satellite images of Iranian oil tankers that were able to, and again, they're not doing this directly. It's not leaving Iran and then going through the Strait of Hormuz. It was claimed that there are oil tankers that in the waters of Iran are moving, or just outside of them, are moving oil from one oil tanker with an Iranian flag to another oil tanker not officially tied to them, and then that sails through the Strait of Hormuz under a different flag. So, there's nuance to this conversation here that is far more than, is it open, is it closed, is there a negotiation, is there not a negotiation? We're in this high friction situation where there is no one clear answer. And then everyone's playing the game. What is risky? What is safe? What can we do today? What can we possibly do tomorrow? That's where we are. It's this very uncomfortable conversation where we're sort of stuck day after day having the same conversation, hoping for something to change. And the sad news is
Mhm.
it's not changing right now, Yael.
Yeah, exactly. And the headline that we see in Israel during this entire weekend is that Iran can have 100 nuclear bombs, not just 10, like 100. And that's based on the amount of uranium that they still have, which is beneath the military level of what was struck in Isfahan and in Natanz, the nuclear facilities that are now being covered underneath the rubbles because of the bombings that took place there in Midnight Hammer and also in this war. So does the, I don't know if it's a rumor or the fact or a report that the Iranians can achieve up to 100 nuclear bombs change the mission or the goal of this campaign? Or is that just rumors?
No, no, it's not a rumor. We were talking about this before we started this live. It's a little more complex than that, in the sense that the Iranians have different levels of enriched uranium, aside from the enriched uranium that's at 60%, give or take, that is close enough to what is needed for a nuclear bomb, that the US and other entities are considering what they have. Underneath that are different tiers of enrichment beyond what is needed for, let's call it, civilian energy production. And those are related to the different centrifuges and et cetera. But again, let's just have a quick lesson in how mass media works nowadays in the age of the internet. I would call that headline slightly a clickbait headline. This isn't from us. This comes from New York Times, and it's just a recycling of information. And let me say this I'll pose it as a question to you. If we know that the Iranians are able to enrich uranium, and that it starts at one level and it ends after many, many months of doing this at another level, and we know they have X amount of this top layer over here, it is sort of obvious that in this gap between not enriched and fully enriched, or let's call it weapons grade enriched uranium, that there are other amounts of material. That's sort of an obvious statement. But because
That
this
makes
creates
sense.
a sense of sensation, because it sounds dramatic, then they're saying it's not this. I'll tell you what the bad news really is. Forget the uranium for just a second. Information is the big problem here. Once a country knows how to enrich uranium, once they know how to build the centrifuges, once they know how to assemble a warhead, once they know how to build the ballistic missiles, I'll just say this as a fact. You could blow up every single factory in Iran that has ever made a ballistic missile. You could assassinate 90% of the engineers and the scientists who've built the nuclear plant up till now, and you could bury underground the vast majority, let's say 95% of the fully enriched uranium that they have, or the most enriched uranium that they have. Give them enough time, they'd be able to build it again. And that's really the whole story here. When you're fighting against countries that are trying to emerge as a nuclear power, it's not a black and white question. It's not binary. Do they have a bomb? Do they not have a bomb? It's a question of, are they investing the resources? Are they willing to go against international treaties? Are they willing to buy from the North Koreans? Or what are they willing to do as far as the risk to try and obtain the technology, the knowledge to build a bomb? And then there's a question of timelines. And this is where things get a little confusing for people. From Israel's perspective, for me and you, if the question was, should we have struck on the 28th of February, knowing full well that the Iranians were pushing for a bomb, and knowing that we would not be able to 100% eliminate the plan, or wait to some unknown date in the future where we can guess that it'll be closer to 100% to eliminate the plan? And the answer is a resounding, obviously, we should attack and eliminate their nuclear plan, right? Because we want to do it now and not in 8 months, not in 12 months, when they're 2 days away or 2 weeks away from having an operational bomb, because then you might miss the window. And that's the reality here. It's a question of timelines. Can you change the timeline for the Iranians? And we did. And this is the big success here. Israel and the United States set back the Iranian ballistic missile program, their nuclear military program, and the manpower that's related to it. We set them back years in this war, not months, years in this war. It's going to take them a lot of money and a lot of time to rebuild the infrastructure and the human knowledge that has been taken away from them in this war. Also, they've lost a lot of money and resources in these bombing campaigns. So yes, they can push for it again. Yes, they have enriched uranium, but their rebuilding process is much longer. And there's one more thing that exists now that didn't exist before this operation started. And that is the knowledge on the Iranian side of what Israel and the United States are willing to do to stop them. And that didn't exist before that. That's an important component. They know we're willing to do everything that is needed to stop them from reaching nuclear capability. And that means a lot to them because they're going to be rethinking and recalculating how much they can do, how much risk they can take in the future, knowing what we've done this time around to prevent them from getting to a bomb. I think that's really the important line to end with.
No, exactly, Mati. Well, thank you so much for this. And let's pray really that our leaders and the negotiating teams will have all the wisdom that they need in order to make the right steps to move forward and make sure that the Iranians do not reach a nuclear bomb, not now and not in 2 years from now. Thank you very much, Mati.
Let me just say one more line, Yael, which is that in the reality that we live in right now, and especially in the Middle East, problems don't really ever go away. You can diminish them and you can manage them, but you can't completely eliminate them and take them off the table. That's sort of what we need to have in the back of our heads. And what that means is you need to always be strong and always be praying. That's something you need to have as a country who wants to survive and thrive in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, thank you so much. Hope you have a great week and see you again tomorrow.
Thank you, Yael.
And to all of you that are joining us, again, like Mati said, this is a spiritual war, and the first casualty of a spiritual war is the truth. So continue spreading the truth with us. Help us share this content with as many people as possible. You can also click on the subscribe button so that we'll reach more people around the world. And you can also look for Yair Pinto and for Mati Shoshani on our social media platforms. So we invite you to take part in our Rebuild Israel campaign. It's something that's rooted deep in the land of Israel and in all our hearts. The Rebuild Israel campaign continues. It's bringing life back to Israel's north. And along Israel's northern border, an area marked by war, displacement, and loss, we are planting an apple orchard, not as a symbol for a single moment, but as part of a long-term commitment to rebuild what was damaged. And this orchard is more than just agriculture. It creates jobs for local families. It helps communities return and rebuild. And it sends a clear message to the people of Israel: you are not alone. When you donate, you're not just giving, you're rebuilding. Your support puts trees in the ground, restores livelihoods, and transforms land scarred by war into a land that grows again. This is how renewal takes root. This is how Israel rebuilds after wars. Join us in restoring the north and strengthening the future of the land of Israel. You can go now to tbn.org/rebuildisrael. Again, that's tbn.org/rebuildisrael, or call 800-804-7895. Rebuild the land, restore hope, bless the future. The Revolutionary Guards in Iran, they have issued a new threat, and this time it sounds like preparations for the next confrontation. After President Trump canceled the dispatch of the Witkoff-Kushner negotiating teams and the talks in Pakistan, Iran announced that it had prepared detention camps for enemy soldiers, and that any new attack would be met with a response beyond the enemy's expectations. In other words, while diplomats are still searching for a way back to the table, the American military and the Iranians are already speaking the language of readiness for renewed fire. So are we watching another pressure game before a deal, or the final minutes before the ceasefire begins to collapse? I'm Yair Pinto, and this is the closing of day 57 of the Roaring Lion War, or by its American name, Epic Fury. Today, we connect all the fronts into one picture: Iran, Hormuz, Pakistan, the 3 American aircraft carriers, the uranium stockpile whose exact location no one knows, and the northern front against Hezbollah, a terrorist organization who's a proxy of Iran, which continues to burn every other the headline of a ceasefire with Iran. The main event of the day took place in Pakistan, but its echoes are being felt from the Arabian Sea all the way to southern Lebanon. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi arrived in Islamabad. He met with Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, with Pakistan's Foreign Minister, and with the Army Chief Hashim Munir. He delivered Tehran's response to the American proposal. But then he left Pakistan without meeting any American representatives, and that's exactly when Trump made his move. While his envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, were preparing for the long flight, Trump stopped them. He told them in very sharp words that they would not fly 18 hours just to sit and talk about nothing. According to Donald Trump, all the cards are in the American hands. And if the Iranians want to talk, they can call. That's not just negotiating sentences. That's a military message wrapped in diplomatic language. Washington is not chasing Tehran. Washington is waiting for Tehran to come to it. While American power is already deployed all around the region, Iran, on the other hand, continues to insist that there is no direct negotiations with the United States of America. The Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman said that there is no planned meeting with the Americans and that messages will be transferred through Pakistan. Iranian sources close to the Supreme National Security Council said that Tehran sees the ceasefire only as a tactical pause and is preparing for every possible betrayal. And this is the heart of the crisis. The United States wants an Iranian proposal that meets American demands. Iran wants the naval blockade over the Strait of Hormuz lifted without first accepting America's red lines. Pakistan is trying to mediate, but on the ground, everyone is already preparing for the possibility that the talks will collapse. The naval blockade is the point that frightens Tehran more than any single strike. The United States claims that dozens of ships have been blocked on their way to or from Iranian ports. United States Central Command released footage of the destroyer USS Rafael Perlata enforcing the blockade alongside a vessel carrying an Iranian flag. Iran, meanwhile, claims that the Americans are not truly capable of closing the sea and is reporting that tankers have passed through the Gulf to the Gulf of Oman. But even if Iran manages to move one tanker, the large picture remains clear. The blockade begins the regime into a different kind of war. Not only bombs, not only missiles, but economic strangulation, pressure on ports, damage to oil exports, and fear of an internal energy crisis. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has already called on the public to reduce electricity and energy consumption. He said Iran's enemies are destroying the country's infrastructure and placing it under blockade, and therefore the public must control its consumption. That statement matters because when the president of Iran asks citizens to save energy, he's basically admitting that the war has already entered the home, not only the command rooms. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent added another layer of pressure. He said that extending sanctions relief for Russian or Iranian oil is not on the table. Regarding Iran, he said it very simply: we have the blockade, and no oil is leaving Iran. In other words, the United States is not only threatening, it is trying to close the tap. And then comes the big military picture. A massive American naval force is now concentrated in the Middle East, the largest United States Central Command buildup since 2003. 3 aircraft carriers, the Abraham Lincoln, the Gerald R. Ford, and the George Bush, are operating in or on their way to the region. Together, they carry more than 200 aircrafts and helicopters, more than 15,000 crew members, fighters, Marines, and naval personnel, along with at least 9 destroyers inside their strike groups. This is not a force sent only to be photographed from the deck. The Gerald R. Ford brings advanced electromagnetic aircraft launch systems, allowing a faster rate of takeoffs. F-18E fighter jets provide strike capabilities and air superiority. EA-18G Growler aircraft can disrupt enemy communications and radar systems. The destroyers are equipped with AEGIS air defensive systems along with anti-submarine capabilities. In the Middle East, a deployment like this means one thing. The United States wants control of the air, control of the sea, and the ability to respond quickly if Iran makes a mistake. So in the meantime, I call on you to keep hitting the subscribe button and sharing the truth. Yeah, that's our way of reaching more people with what's happening and our way of sharing what's happening boots on the ground here with as much as people as we can around the world. If you want to help us, that's the best way to do it. And then you know how to pray for the situation. So we share the truth so you'll know how to pray for what's happening here in this region. A lot has been said about the 0.5 ton of highly enriched uranium that, according to the estimates, is buried inside a tunnel complex that was previously stuck. But that is only one part of the story, because according to the assessments, Iran has about 11 tons of uranium at different enrichment levels, from 2% up to 60%. If that material goes through additional enrichment and processing, it could be enough for dozens of potential nuclear bombs. Some estimates speak of a range between 35 and 100 bombs, depending on the technical ability and the stages of enrichment. And that's the point that wars Israel's economy and security establishment. You can bomb a facility, you can destroy centrifuges, you can strike tunnels, but you cannot bomb knowledge. And if Iran has managed to disperse the stockpiles, hide materials, or build small enrichment facilities inside mountain tunnel networks, then the nuclear problem has not disappeared. It has simply moved underground. That's why the blockade, the sanctions, and the diplomatic pressure all connect to the same goal. The United States and Israel are not looking only for another round of strikes. They are looking for a way to neutralize Iran's ability to return to a nuclear track after the fire stops. Without that, every ceasefire is only a new hourglass. At the same time, inside Iran itself, the atmosphere of fear and chaos continues. Trump said that the United States is dealing with the people who are in charge right now. That sentence suggests that even Washington is not fully certain who is really holding the steering wheel in Tehran. Iran has denied divisions at the top, but the very need to deny shows that the question is already in the air. The regime is also continuing to send messages inward. Iran executed a man that it described as a Mossad operative, claiming he was involved in violence and arson during protests against the regime. At the same time, the intelligence branch of the Revolutionary Guards claimed it had foiled an attack plan by groups operating for Israel and the United States in the Kurdistan and Kermanshah provinces. These are not only internal announcements, they are messages to Iranian citizens. Any connection to the West, any protest, any activity on the ground can be presented as betrayal. That's the regime's way of keeping the streets quiet, even while pressure from the outside grows. But while the Teheranians digs in, southern Lebanon continues to become the testing ground for the next arrangement. The IDF announced that it located a stockpile of Hezbollah anti-tank missiles inside a weapons storage facility in the Shiite Ridge area of southern Lebanon. At the same time, soldiers from the paratroopers reconnaissance units and the Alam Combat Engineering Unit, under the command of Division 98, continue to neutralize bombings used by Hezbollah for military purposes in the stadium neighborhood of Binjbel. In the same area, troops also found an underground shaft and a Hezbollah AK-47 rifle. That's not small details. Binjbel is not just another village on the map. It is a deep symbol for Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Every operation there touches the ground, the public narrative, and the struggle over who actually controls southern Lebanon on the day after the war. Over the past day, the IDF struck buildings in southern Lebanon that were used by Hezbollah, including buildings connected to the Radwan forces, as well as a storage site used for weapons. The strikes were carried out south of the four defensive lines in order to remove a threat to the IDF forces and to the Israeli civilians. Lebanese reports described strikes in villages of Kunin and Safad el-Batikah. Over the weekend, the IDF eliminated more than 15 Hezbollah terrorists in southern Lebanon. Forces from Division 36 eliminated 3 terrorists who were traveling in an armed pickup truck and later eliminated another terrorist riding a motorcycle south of the 4 defensive line. After that, 2 launches were fired from Lebanon towards the Upper Galilee. One was intercepted. The other fell in an open area. There were no casualties. The IDF described the fire as a blatant violation of the ceasefire. Hezbollah, for its part, is trying to turn these violations into a new story. After a period of ambiguity, the organization has moved to direct statements in Lebanese media. It is detailing its attacks, taking responsibility, and trying to rebuild the image of Lebanon's protector. But behind that slogan is a much harder reality for Hezbollah. Hundreds of thousands of displaced Shiites are facing heavy pressure on Hezbollah's leadership. People want to return to their homes, even when villages are destroyed, even when unexploded ordnance remains, and even when parts of the area is defined by the IDF as dangerous zones. Hezbollah is trying to exploit that flow of returning civilians. Its operatives are trying to blend into the civilian movement, approach the IDF positions, collect intelligence, and create daily friction. The IDF soldiers on the ground are dealing with dozens of incidents every single day. It's not always a tank facing a missile. Sometimes it's a civilian sent forward. Sometimes it's an operative hiding inside a civilian crowd. Sometimes it is a slow attempt to erode the yellow line that the IDF has marked in southern Lebanon. The IDF's Arabic language spokesman has issued repeated warnings to the Lebanese civilians, including a list of villages that they must not approach. The message is clear. Movement south of that line is considered a threat. The warnings also include a ban on approaching the Litani River area and Wadi Saluki, after Hezbollah attempted to push civilian movement back onto routes that endanger the IDF forces. And there is another method that Hezbollah is trying to use: ambulances. The IDF revealed that footage of how Hezbollah uses medical vehicles and medical equipment to disguise the movement of terrorists and weapons. In the Kantara area, forces from the Golani Brigade located an ambulance used to hide explosives, mortars, magazines, and a grenade. In another incident, a Hezbollah terrorist operating near an ambulance and carrying an RPG they fired at an IDF forces and were eliminated. After the encounter, weapons were found inside the ambulance that had been used by the terrorist to establish himself in the area and fight from it. This is exactly the kind of war that Hezbollah wants to force on Israel. Not a clean war between two armies, but a war inside villages, among civilians, ambulances, destroyed homes, combat tunnels, weapons depots, and operatives trying to look like returning residents. And still, the Lebanese government is trying to continue the talks with Israel. The ceasefire has been extended by 3 more weeks, and the Americans are trying to reach a permanent framework. At the heart of the dispute is the new security zone in southern Lebanon, about 10 kilometers deep. Israel demands that Hezbollah be pushed beyond the Litani River and that its military capabilities be dismantled. Lebanon and Hezbollah demand a full Israeli withdrawal. The question is who breaks first. Hezbollah is trying to wear down the understandings on the ground. Israel is trying to set security facts. And the United States is trying to hold both Lebanon and Iran inside the same strategic framework. Because in the end, everything is connected. Hormuz, Binjbel, Pakistan, the uranium, the blockade, the aircraft carriers, and the pressure on the European allies. Britain and Spain have also entered this storm after Washington examined possible response measures against countries that did not give full support to the campaign against Iran. Spain made clear that it will act only within the framework of international law. Britain drew a red line around the Falkland Islands. Even inside NATO, the war against Iran is already creating cracks. And at the same time, the United States is discovering another advantage: energy. While the Gulf is under pressure and Hormuz becomes a global choke point, American energy exports are reaching very high levels. Europe and Asia are looking for every available shipment. Washington understands that this war is not being fought only with missiles and aircrafts. It is also being fought with barrels of oil, liquefied natural gas, and the ability to supply energy to the world when Iran tries to turn the sea into a weapon. This is the big picture of day 57. Iran is not folding. Trump is not chasing it. The IDF continues to dismantle Hezbollah infrastructure in southern Lebanon. And the American military is sitting in the region with a force that can move from deterrence to strike in a very short time. This is not a quiet ceasefire. This is an armed ceasefire. Each side is standing in position, with a finger very close to the trigger, waiting for the other side to make the first mistake. If the talks in Pakistan do not return to track, and if Iran continues to use Hormuz as a weapon of war, the question will no longer be whether escalation returns, but on which front it begins first. So keep spreading the truth, follow us, and most importantly, don't forget to hit that subscribe button here on YouTube to stay tuned to whatever is happening in this region, boots on the ground style. I'm Yair Pinto, and with me is Mati Shoshani. Feel free to look for us on our social media platforms to get the behind-the-scene look of what's happening in Israel. And seriously, the best thing that you can do for Israel, for your nation, is to pray. So pray for all the negotiation teams to have wisdom, godly wisdom, not just the stuff that we teach ourselves on this land, something from above. Pray for the soldiers to have peace. Pray for their families back at home, not to worry for them, to have peace of heart that they're in good hands. Pray for all the children in Israel that are affected by all these wars. And above all, keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem. And we'll see you again tomorrow.